people, whatever deprived group you can think of that's been in a difficult state, we can teach them how to read and write in 36 lessons, 36 one-hour lessons.
That's
costs $8. In some instances, let's pay the teachers more, but let's get the National Education Association out of it. And let's get Washington out of it. And let's get it down to the local community. And, well, anyhow, I'm on my soapbox. Since the Democratic National Convention in Atlanta, pro-life members of Operation Rescue have been held in Atlanta jails for blocking the entrance to an abortion clinic. And they're following in the footsteps of other pro-life protesters, now doing jail time in what appears to be a new and much more serious stage of the pro-life battle. Sam Walker has this report.
March 26, 1986, pro-life activist Joan Andrews walks into an abortion clinic in Pensacola, Florida, and tries to unplug a suction machine used for abortions. She is arrested. The charges: criminal mischief, resisting arrest without violence, and burglary. The sentence: 5 years in prison. Today, Joan Andrews is in her 3rd year of solitary confinement for refusing to submit to prison regimen. January 22nd of this year, 11 pro-life activists blocked the entrance to an abortion clinic in Washington, D.C. All are arrested and charged with trespassing, but only one, Christiane Collins, is put in jail. The reason, according to Collins, an article on her pro-life activities in the Washington Post magazine is leaked to the public prosecutor before publication and allegedly used to question her on the witness stand. And July 19th, just last week, 130 members of Operation Rescue sit down in front of an Atlanta abortion clinic, disrupting its business during the Democratic National Convention. Imprisoned for assorted charges, the pro-lifers refuse to give their real names, calling themselves Baby Jane Doe and Baby John Doe, commemorating children who have died from abortion and stymieing the Georgia jail system, which must have identification before a prisoner can be released. On Tuesday, rescue leader Randall Terry issued an ultimatum. If the now just over 100 rescuers are not released on Wednesday, that is yesterday, under the names Baby Jane Doe and Baby John Doe, he will put out a nationwide call to pro-life leaders to send their people to Atlanta, shut down more abortion clinics, get arrested, and flood Atlanta jails with pro-lifers until the system must let them go. The plan is to make Atlanta the Selma, Alabama of the pro-life movement. Yesterday, the prisoners were not released, and Randy Terry's call went out. He spoke it in a telephone interview for CBN News.
Come down here and make a stand here where the adversaries of life are trying to break the courage and break the will of the rescue movement. If God has chosen to make this the place where a full-pitched battle is fought and won by the pro-lifers, which will turn the tide of the pro-life movement, similar to Selma was for the civil rights movement, then so be it. We cannot blink, we cannot back down, we have to stand up now.
Thus, the battle lines are drawn and the pro-life movement goes into a more fast-paced stage, where the stakes are higher and the tempers hotter, and where neither side is prepared to give an inch.
They are on the outside, trying through tactics of intimidation to really stop women from exercising what is their very basic fundamental right, and they are failing.
Operation Rescue has staged rescues now at 8 abortion clinics since its first in November of last year. So far, there has been no incident of violence, and non-violence is their stated policy. On the other hand, CBN News obtained this warning to the rescuers from Bill Baird, owner of 3 abortion clinics in New York City, at a rescue there last May.
My place, we have karate experts waiting. I am waiting for them to come, and they will not forget it, I promise you. And that's not a threat, it's a promise. They are going to learn that no longer will we tolerate so-called Christians who forgot the humility of religion.
For 15 years now, pro-lifers have been saying that abortion is murder. But have they acted like they really believe that? Activists like Christiane Collins say no. That's why she's here, incarcerated, for what she says is violating man's law in order to uphold God's.
The bottom line came down to this. I felt like God had never asked me to yield my conscience to a legislature, and he has never asked me to elevate the state to the place of God in my life.
Christiane Collins told CBN News she wrestled long and hard with the decision to engage in civil disobedience for the pro-life cause. This is where she came out.
If people really believe that abortion is murder, that it's time we act like we think it's murder. If I saw somebody holding a gun to an adult human being or a child, I wouldn't walk by and say that the law says I can't take that person's gun, that would be stealing, I would walk up to that person and I would try to disarm them.
Right to life remains the law. You don't care if women die. Right to life remains the law. You don't care if women die.
Pro-choicers accuse Operation Rescue of using media coverage of the Democratic National Convention in Atlanta as a platform to spread their own point of view.
Their tactics, extremist tactics, are abhorrent to the American public. People back away from that kind of activity. They don't like to see that kind of extremism.
We pray for our enemies, Lord God.
Yes,
we
Lord.
pray, Lord God, for you to touch the heart.
Jesus.
Open their eyes and ears, Lord. They see
Jesus'
the
name.
wrong that they're doing, Lord.
But now it appears that much more is afoot in Atlanta than just another protest group grabbing media attention. The pro-lifers of Operation Rescue count themselves guilty because they say for 15 years they have stood by and not acted like abortion was murder. Now they feel they are doing that. They say they will refuse to give prison officials their real names and will stay in jail as long as it takes for other pro-lifers across the country to force Atlanta jails to release them. CBN News has learned that the next rescue, the next sit-in blocking the entrance to an Atlanta abortion clinic, is scheduled for tomorrow morning. I'm Sam Walker, CBN News.
You know, that gentleman from the abortion clinic said the Christians should learn the humility of religion. There were 6 million Jews butchered in Nazi Germany. Should the Christians in Germany have been humble and allowed that to happen? Should there have been no protests at all? Should not the Christian church have risen against it? And is not that one of the condemnations that's made against a former pope because he didn't speak out more forcefully against what the Nazis were doing? They just let it happen. And the world was comfortable and didn't want to be disturbed. And so 6 million innocent people were victims of genocide by a madman because nobody spoke up. I don't think the humility of religion is that way at all. I think the Bible says that we should break the yoke of oppression and affliction. That's what it says. If you read the 58th chapter of Isaiah, it says that you should go out and break every yoke, break it, not by humility, but to go do something about it. Well, these people are doing something. And joining us live by telephone from the Fulton County Jail in Atlanta is Randall Terry. He's the director of Operation Rescue. And Randall, what's happening next down there? You've refused to give your names to the jail officials. Is that going to be your posture continuously?
Yeah, so we have close to 70% of the prisoners that are still with us that are committed for the duration, as long as it takes. And we feel that it's time that we began to sacrifice, to put some teeth in our rhetoric, as some of the others have said, and to identify with the children. The children have no names, they have no rights, they have no voice, and this is our way of making their plight known to the American public. It's been exciting. I cannot tell you the fervency and the blessing of the prayer meetings, the preaching by the 7 ministers that are in jail here with us. The unity, the praise, the worship has been unbelievable. I have never in my life experienced anything like this. Morale is so high, it's astounding.
Rhonda, tell me about the attitude of the police down there. I mean, Atlanta isn't exactly a city of people who want to be brutal to convention goers and people like yourself. The governor of Georgia is a very dedicated Christian, and by the way, he shares your view, as far as I can tell, about the sanctity of life. What are they saying to you?
Well, most of the officials in the prison system that we have been dealing with have been not only courteous and polite and very professional, but a lot of them have been sympathetic with us and kind of get us aside and say, by the way, I'm a Christian too, or by the way, I think what you're doing is great, keep it up. And it's been really exciting that way. The witness that we are making in the system is unbelievable. And I believe that God can use it to help turn the tide across the country.
Well, now, you are calling for people from across the country to come and help you.
That's right.
And how many are you in actual touch with, and how many do you want to come down there?
Well, I would like to have, by the end of 28 days, I would like to have at least 300 to 400 more people, if not more, that have been arrested and come to jail as Baby Jane and Baby John Doe. Now, what we're asking people to do is commit from 3 to 7 days. You see, at any point, any one of us can walk. All we have to do is give our name and address. That's it, and we can walk out the door. And so if people can come, can take their vacation time, can come and can join their brothers and sisters in jail as this testimony, it will be a tremendous impact. And I just want to encourage people that St. Paul said, the Apostle Paul in Philippians chapter 1 said, don't be discouraged about my imprisonment because it's caused the furtherance of the gospel. Many of the brethren, seeing my bonds, have waxed bold in the cause of Christ. And this stand that we are taking here will cause the furtherance of the cause of Christ for these children. There's no doubt about it that we have 100 seeds of courage that are dying to themselves, and when they go out back into the world, into their towns across the country, they are going to fall into the ground and produce 30, 60, and 100-fold.
Well, Randall, congratulations for what you're doing. It's very interesting. And we have here in the studio with us Joe Foreman, who was one of those arrested. And Joe, how'd you get out? I'm glad to have you here. What'd you do?
Well, it was miraculous, actually. I had a plane ticket to go out to California in order to lead another rescue out there. And an hour before the plane was to leave, the director of prisons walked in, and we got to talking to him. Randy and I got to talking to him. And simply asked to be released into his custody, and I gave my word that I would return, and so he saw fit to do that, and from there I was asked to come on the show.
Well, what do you think, or why do you think the pro-life movement has reached this stage? This is a stage of confrontation now. It's not just trying to get legislation through. You're going to the streets and it's confrontation. Why?
Well, as a matter of fact, it's not political what we're doing, and it's not a grab for cameras or anything else. If it was, we failed in that respect. What we are doing is focusing in directly on the victim who is to be killed, not the theory of being pro-life or pro-death, but the tiny victim who you could hold in your hands like this. I have 300 children in my basement at home, and in preparing them for burial, they're sitting there in tiny little sacks in their mother's blood, and the scriptures occurred to me when God says, I found you in your mother's blood, and that's where I called you by name. You see, and so what we have done is we've taken the name of these nameless little children on ourselves, just like Jesus Christ did that for us.
Well, you know, some people in the pro-life movement are against this kind of thing. They sort of feel that's a little too much. Now, what do you say to them?
I would say this is normal Christian behavior. It's not radical. It's simple obedience. When God says, I believe in the Bible literally. When God says, rescue those being dragged away to slaughter, I don't think he's saying, if you have time, if you have a few minutes, by the way, next Saturday, maybe. But he's saying, rescue them, period, categorically.
Well, as far as people coming in, what is your anticipation? Are you personally going to be in touch with people around the country to tell them how to get to Atlanta and what to do once they get there? Is there going to be some directing down there?
Yes, there are people down there on the scene. This turning into a full-scale battle was not something that we had necessarily planned for, but when the abortion industry dug in its feet, you got to remember that the courts were going to let us go last Friday, and the abortion industry sent in one of their heavy-duty lawyers who argued Doe versus Bolton and said, do not let these people out. And so it turned into a struggle between those who want to defend the life of the children and those who want to put pressure on the city of Atlanta to keep us there, and the abortion industry won the first phase of that battle.
They may have overplayed their hands, what you think?
They may have, and what I'm praying is that there are Christians out there who want to take on the name of these children, just like we have, and join us.
Well, you use the term abortion industry. How much money is made in abortion around the country? Do you have any idea what the magnitude of it is?
I've heard their own analysts say it's well over $1 billion.
Well, I'm sure that's true, at least. But it's a business, ladies and gentlemen. These clinics are in business to make money, and they make money by killing little babies, unborn babies. They make money at it. As a matter of fact, there's some initiatives underfoot right now to use fetuses, to actually breed fetuses, to implant women who would in turn begin to be pregnant with babies. The babies then would be taken out for experimentation in various laboratories. I mean, some of the things boggle the imagination, sort of a Dr. Strangelove type approach, or some of the worst of the Nazi genetic experiments. That kind of thing is not only being contemplated, it may well be done in certain countries. So we're getting a horrible thing going on in our society. The question that we want to ask you is, however, do you think so-called nonviolent civil disobedience is a good thing? Or do you think it should be done through the courts and through legislation, and people shouldn't go into that kind of a confrontational mode? Now, we're going to ask you to express your point of view on this, and there's some numbers available that you can call. Do you support using nonviolent civil disobedience to stop abortion? If you feel yes, then you can make a telephone call and register your opinion. It's 1-900-720-6141. If your answer is no, you think you're opposed to it, you think it's an embarrassment or whatever you want to say, then you dial 1-900-720-6142. It would be interesting to see what you feel about this. And these people are down there, 100 of them, and basically, do you think what they did is right and you support it? If you do, you dial 1-900-720-6141, and if you're opposed to them, you just change the last digit, 6142. And we'd be very interested to hear your opinion on that particular activity. By the way, one of our callers, our viewers, called yesterday, and he said, we did an initial piece of this during the Democratic Convention, and he takes the Washington Post every day, and he didn't see any coverage of this at all. Not a word in that newspaper purporting to be a national newspaper covering the convention and the activities. So he called the main desk and he said, quote, "Why hasn't the Washington Post covered the news about the 100 people jailed in Atlanta because of demonstrating at the Democratic National Convention?" So what did they do? They put him on hold twice. And the answer he finally received was that the paper, and this is a quote, exercised editorial prerogative as to what was more important in the news, close quote. His response was, anytime 100 people are jailed anywhere in the United States of America, that's important news. And I really believe that's important news. And if the liberal media doesn't cover it, I think we're seeing right there an unbelievable bias, not even to mention it. If these were 100 civil rights demonstrators who were black or Asian or women or anybody else of the liberal persuasion, perhaps, that would be front-page headlines. You know it would. Not one mention in a paper that claims to be one of the leading papers in America. It's kind of interesting. Well, Terry, what's next?
Well, the abortion industry talks to us about women's rights, but as Pat just mentioned, it is still big business in this country. The woman in our next story stood to make millions from the abortion clinics that she owned and operated. And as Mike Rasnick explains, it all started as a way to dull the pain that her own abortion had caused.
In 1973, Carol Everett was happily married with 2 children when she discovered she was pregnant. She was excited about it, but her husband insisted on an abortion. Carol decided to talk with a doctor about this conflict, but was totally unprepared for his advice.
Well, rather than really offering me a sympathetic ear or another alternative, he said, oh, abortion is simple. You don't have to go anywhere. I mean, you just come right in here. You bring your husband's urine, the pregnancy test will be negative. We'll do the hospital abortion. Your insurance will pay for it.
And did you?
Yes. It was an easy alternative. I wanted someone to tell me not to, yet everyone was saying yes.
Immediately, Carol began running from what she had done.
The first thing I did was become very angry at my husband for not standing up and saying, let's have this baby. So rather than verbalizing that, I acted it out. I had an affair and got back at him very quickly. And of course, we separated and of course, very quickly divorced. And then I started drinking one day a month. I just got drunk, thinking that would get it off my mind completely, but it didn't. And finally, then I went to the doctor and got some mood elevators that were so strong that you took one at night and you were just in a fog all day long and dead asleep at night. And then finally, I went to a psychiatrist, weekly, bi-weekly, and soon daily. And at the rate of $125 an hour, I couldn't keep that up very long.
When she finally thought she had a grip on herself, Carol went to work for a man in the medical supply business who eventually opened a chain of highly profitable abortion clinics. Carol helped with referrals.
We would go in and set up something called Advisory Referral Center, sanctioned nonprofit by IRS. We were telling people that we were doing sexual counseling, and all we were in fact doing was funneling in the free pregnancy test ad brought in problem pregnancy women, and we would sell them an abortion and send them to his clinic. By then he had 4.
Soon Carol was asked to take on a management role in the operation of the clinics, and the business took off.
I really believe that what I was doing was re-justifying my own abortion each time I sold an abortion, and it was something that kind of patted me on the back each time another woman came in. So I really got into the numbers, and we took his numbers from 185 to over 400 in his Dallas clinic. So he sent me to his Fort Worth clinic, and there we went from 200 a month to over 400 a month. And the last month I was with him, I believe he did 823 abortions.
After being turned down for an equity interest in the business, Carol decided it was time to open her own abortion clinics. She did, and she made a fortune.
I was on target in 1983 to easily clear 250, 260,000. We had 2 clinics open, and we planned to open 3 more in the next year. And when we had our 5 clinics open, I would be taking home $1 million a year.
You were spending it too, weren't you?
I was spending it. It was running through my fingers. Literally, I would take home $13,000 a month, and I would never even have enough money to keep, I would have to struggle to keep the utilities on. We spent every cent.
But along with the financial success Carol was enjoying came problems with partners in this venture. A business counselor who happened to be a preacher was called in to help mediate the difficulties. Carol, who claimed to be a Christian and who tithed on her abortion income, was confronted by this man.
He even told me, went so far as to be as bold as to tell me that the Lord had given him 30 days to be involved in this situation, that there was someone the Lord wanted out of the abortion clinic. And I thought this guy was crazy. But we prayed a prayer of salvation, and we asked Jesus Christ to come into my life as Lord and Savior. And when I went back into that abortion clinic for the first time in my life, I didn't see people dancing in the front door saying, "Hey, I'm glad I'm here, I'm ready for my abortion." I saw women who were hurting, who were looking just as I had been looking for that one person to say, "No, you don't have to have an abortion, there's another way."
Within 27 days, Carol left the business following a TV News investigative report that uncovered the fact her clinics were performing abortions on women who were not pregnant.
I had this incredible peace that I did not understand, and I still can't understand it, but I knew unequivocally that I was not supposed to be in the abortion business. I knew somehow that I was going to be taken care of if I walked out that door. And literally everything around me was just falling apart, and I had just this incredible sense of well-being.
Subsequent to the expose, Carol negotiated a buyout agreement with her partners, and she began working in a Richardson butcher shop which she owned. It was there God began to really work in her life.
Well, that was my wilderness experience, and when I got out there, things were very different. I went from a lot of money to no money, and I had to learn to trust God, that He would provide, that He would literally take care of me and be my source.
And through a seminary student who washed windows at her store, Carol began to more openly accept the Right to Life movement.
Right after I came out of the abortion clinic, I knew someday that I would tell the truth about what I knew, but I was kind of postponing it. And literally, when this man came to me and said that he was working with the Right to Life, would I talk to them? I was astounded. The Lord just brought it right into me and said, "Here it is, step into it."
Then Carol began and is continuing to work through personal healing for her own abortion experience.
I grieved for that baby that I killed, for the baby that was a part of me that had died. And I'm not going to tell you I'm through it, because I'm not. But that was 1.5 years ago. And it's an
How do you reconcile something like that?
I think it's much more difficult because you had part in the death, and you said okay to the death. And I'm not certain that anyone can ever be healed of it except through Christ.
Today, Carol Everett is Public Affairs Director for the Greater Dallas Right to Life Committee. She speaks at forums around the country about her experiences in the abortion industry. But on top of her commitment to Right to Life is her commitment to Jesus Christ.
Jesus Christ is my life. He's my source. He's my everything, my best friend. He's there with me. I really believe that the Lord called me out of the abortion business, and He is now taking my life, the very worst that could be imagined in my life, and making it good.
For the 700 Club, this is Michael Rasnick in Dallas, Texas.
You know, in the piece we saw earlier in the show, we saw pro-choice people screaming, "Right to life or name the lie, you don't care if women die." The lie is that women don't have to die. The choice we're making here is not between women or babies. The choice we're making is the choice for life.
That's exactly right. And in most cases, it's convenience. You know, one woman we heard about wanted an abortion because she wouldn't fit into her bikini in the summertime, and she wanted to have fun during the summer, and she was afraid that she would have to share her boyfriend with the baby, and so she wanted him all to herself. I mean, it was just totally, utterly selfish. No?
Well, even the sheer inconvenience. I've had women say to me who were pro-abortion say, I'd say, well, why don't you carry the baby and give it for adoption? There are thousands of childless couples who I could never do that. Which the reasoning is
they
just
could kill the baby, but they could
but
give
they
it up
could
for
not give it
abortion.
up.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, as Carol was saying in this, first of all, she's been bruised, she's been hurt. Nobody will tell you about that, and there are people in this audience, some of you watching right now, who are hurting. Jesus forgives you. That's the big good news, is that whatever you've done, he forgives you. The thing that he wants, though, is for us to stop conduct that is bad. He wants us to stop killing. You know, the Bible says there's murder in the land. He's going to judge because there is killing and murder and violence. When you look at the world at the time of Noah, it said every heart of the man was on evil continuously, and there was murder and violence. This is violence, and it is murder. I mean, there's no other way to look at it. God will forgive you of murder. If you committed murder with an adult, he'd forgive you. He'll forgive you. He'll cleanse you. But we cannot continue to legalize murder. I don't care if the United States Congress says it's legal. I don't care if it's the United States Supreme Court. The Supreme Court cannot nullify the law of God. It just doesn't have that power. God never gave any bunch of old men or 8 men and a woman the power to nullify his laws. They can't do that. The United States Constitution can't nullify the law of God. It never intended to when it was first written. And we've framed it into an instrument that oftentimes attempts to do that, to nullify God's word. He doesn't have that authority. And God, one day, is going to hold this nation accountable for the violence and the murder and the lying and the cheating and the stealing that's going on in our land. And more than anything, the conspiracy of silence that goes on in this monstrous media. I was talking to one of the guests earlier, Terry, and I said, are the Atlanta papers covering this? He says, not really. They do a little squib on this. 100 people in jail, protesters, 100 people.
It's remarkable.
A little squib. Washington Post doesn't cover it at all. And
this from the press that claims to be objective in bringing us our news each day.
They're not objective, not at all. Make no mistake about it. And hey, by the way, we've had a lot of requests for this thing. I think one of the ways that you can strike a blow at the giant, in a sense, is to begin to declare your belief system. And I think you ought to put up one that says, I believe in Jesus Christ, and another one, I don't believe the liberal media. We've had thousands of requests.
It's enough to make you want to buy a car, right?
That's right, just to have this, but we'll make these available. They've about a dime a piece, and I suggested if somebody wants to get about 1,000 of them, $100 would do it. But if you want to, whatever you want to do, if you just write bumper stickers, we'd be glad to send you some of them. I think this is, just say bumper stickers, CBN Center, Virginia Beach, Virginia, and you tell us how much. I think every church in America ought to have these, and they ought to be distributed. I'd like to see millions of them all over this nation, and I think we'd start turning some things around. We've got to do something, you know, really. We've got to do something. Why don't you get involved? Well, we've been asking your opinion, by the way, and it's very important, as to what you think about this so-called nonviolent civil disobedience taking place in Atlanta. Are you opposed to it or for it? Some people say, I don't think that's a good way to do. I think we shouldn't, quote, break the law. And others say, well, we should. When the black people were put in the back of the bus, they broke the law by sitting in the front of the bus, and they forced a confrontation, which finally won for them. But do you support this kind of nonviolent civil disobedience? You're opposed to it. If you're for it, think it's a good idea, then you call us, 1-900-720-6141. As soon as the connect is made on the phone, your vote, if you will, is registered. If you're opposed to it, 1-900-720-6142. You just change the last digit, and this just applies on this one day. So you call in, and we'll be letting your opinion known around the nation. So we'll be back with more right after this message. Remember, whatever we're talking about here, if you need help for your life, anything that's going on in your life, all you have to do is pick up the phone and call at 804-420-0700. Other numbers around the nation, And that is our central number to call. More after this.
Since January, here are a few of the things Operation Blessing has done. These are just a few things Operation Blessing has done since January. Please, we need your help. Call now.
On the next Straight Talk, criminals deserve their punishments. Not many would argue that point, but what about the loved ones they leave behind? Their punishment may even be more severe. We'll talk with families of prisoners on Thursday's Straight Talk.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. By the way, this just in on the wire. You might be interested. The administration today has projected that we will be having in America a $152.3 billion budget deficit for fiscal 1988, which continues through October 1 or up to September 30th. And that's up $9.9 billion from February due to the savings and loan bailouts and delays in payments on foreign military sales credit loans. And last year's deficit, fiscal 87, was $148 billion, so it's up about $4 billion over last year, but it's down substantially from the $221 billion that we had as a deficit in 1986. So I don't know if that's good news or bad news.
I don't either. I'm sitting here.
It's going the wrong direction, but it's not as bad as it could have been, I guess.
I guess not. You know, since the death of General Franco in 1975, Spain has gradually become more democratic, even though the country is still officially a monarchy. In this week's edition of World Watch, Kathy Sindorf explains why that's good news.
A Spanish.
It's the 700 Club with your host, Pat Robertson.
Well, thank you and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this edition of the 700 Club. The Soviet economy is in shambles, so Western banks and businesses have stepped in to help bail them out. But how will that ultimately affect the United States?
In providing economic aid to the Soviet Union is committing suicide on the installment plan.
Caucus Chairman Howard Phillips, and we'll have that story for you in just a moment. Terry?
Well, the House and Senate both approved drought relief bills, which would send $6 billion in aid to farmers. The bills contain some items which President Reagan doesn't like because he asked for legislation which deals only with drought relief. But the bills include other measures, such as an increase in milk price supports. However, congressional leaders say they believe the president will still sign the final legislation since they feel that it is close to what he wanted. Some congressmen say even this bill won't be enough, though, as they expect the drought may eventually cause up to $10 billion in damage.
Well, you know, this may not be an unmixed blessing because this particular drought has used up some of the surpluses, and the surpluses have been depressing prices, and prices in turn have caused the farm supports to be up. So in the long range, it may do more good than it does harm.
Well, that's good news.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, President Reagan entered this year's political debate over child care on Thursday by endorsing Vice President Bush's plan to give tax credits to low-income families with children. The president announced his support at the Student Congress on Evangelism in Washington. He said the Bush plan would strengthen the family by allowing mothers to stay at home.
Now, the basic idea here is that the government would simply let families keep up to $1,000 more of their own money. That's money the family itself can decide on how to spend. Working mothers could put the money toward child care. But by giving each family this tax credit, the Vice President's plan would also permit thousands of mothers to choose to stay home with their children.
The president also urged young people to abstain from sex until they're married, and he reaffirmed his call for restoration of prayer in public schools and an end to abortion.
Well, I think that I've heard a lot of people anyway commenting on the fact that Bush's plan seems to be a good one and perhaps the most reasonable one so far. So,
well, this is what we've all been talking about. The concept is what they call enablement. We enable people to do things, and the way we do it is by giving vouchers. And this you give somebody a voucher or a tax credit. A credit is the same thing as a check from the government, because after you've figured out your taxes, it's that little bit at the bottom you say you owe, you get a credit against that, which is the same thing as the government giving you money back. And if you're not entitled to any credits, then there would be a direct grant. These are to poor people, but that's far better than government sponsored, government-controlled institutional daycare. That ABC bill is a disaster, and it's rolling through the passage, and it'll just be one step into something that is psychologically damaging to children.
well, maybe we'll see this step in and make a difference.
Well, we hope. I mean, but it's a good move, and again, the president's right on the money in terms of those particular issues. We applaud him for it.
Well, I know that a lot of people, Pat, are interested in an update on the ongoing story of the Operation Rescue members who are in jail in Atlanta and have been there since the Democratic Convention. CBN News correspondent Deborah Whitson is in Atlanta covering the story, and on Thursday she spoke briefly with Marjorie Pitts-Hames. Pitts-Hames is the attorney for some abortion clinics in Atlanta, and she is at the focal point of the current controversy involving the Operation Rescue prisoners.
Doesn't it seem like after 9 or 10 days in jail, perhaps they've served enough time for this? I mean, why not just let them go?
Well, they have no right to withhold their identity. They have caused extensive expense to the abortion provider community here. We had to have additional security, attorney's fees, lots of measures had to be taken. So they've cost us a good bit of money, and they've made no effort or no intention to make restitution.
How long are you willing to hold out and keep pressing this?
Well, withholding their names and staying in jail is a form of First Amendment protest, which they have a right to do, and I would not want to interfere with their right to stay in jail. So we think they're there until their trial comes up.
One more question. Do you have the slightest bit of admiration maybe for their commitment, for their dedication to their cause?
Yes, I think they are very dedicated to their cause. I think their efforts to interfere with a woman's exercise of her constitutional right to privacy and endangering women's lives and staff people's lives kind of balances that off on the low side. They have courage, but they do not understand that they're endangering women's lives. Surgery is performed inside of these places, general anesthesia, local anesthesia, and a doctor can do extensive harm to a woman if the noise outside creates a stress situation. So yes, I have courage for them, but I also have a disrespect for them because they have disrespected the lives of women.
Operation Rescue performed another rescue this morning at an abortion clinic in Atlanta, and CBN News correspondent Deborah Whitson was there. We'll have a live report from her in a few minutes on today's 700 Club. It's difficult to understand how sitting on the grass in front of a clinic
endangers somebody's constitutional rights. That's, you know, that lawyer said there's a constitutional right to privacy. If anybody goes back into the law and reads the decision in that Griswold versus Connecticut case, which was Justice Douglas, they find that the constitutional right to privacy is a figment of Justice Douglas's imagination. It never existed until just a few years ago. There never was such a right, ever.
Well, she's saying that the women in the clinic have the right to privacy, but the people in jail should have to say who they are.
Yeah, well,
know,
that's, you know, they have a constitutional right to stay in jail. I mean, it just is outrageous that the people who are trying to preserve life would be the ones that would be put in jail. But that's what's happening in our society. We've turned our values so much around that the right, I mean, what if it was a right to kill that lawyer? And I want to do that in private. I have a right to privacy to kill her and not have anybody prevent me from doing it. That's nonsense.
Well, and the unstated fact here, Pat, is also, we had on our program a week and a half ago a couple whose daughter went to a legal clinic, paid for by the government, unbeknownst to her family. There was no stress on the part of the doctor from people sitting outside on the lawn, and she died.
Yes, there have been some real butcheries that have gone on. They cover them up, but they're terrible. But the biggest thing is these abortion clinics are money factories. They're in there turning these, you know, Nathanson, who ran the biggest abortion clinic in America, said that his were open 365 days out of the year. He went to China, and China wasn't as efficient as he was. They did 60,000 abortions. And, you know, the one here locally in this area was called Murder Incorporated for a while. They were just, I mean, they laughed about it. It's terrible what they're doing. Well, here we asked you yesterday what you thought about it. And these people are at it down there, and I know there's some in the Right to Life movement who don't appreciate it. They are not too keen on activist measures. They don't want to do it. And some people from the National Right to Life I have spoken to, they are not supportive in an overt fashion of active measures. So there is a split in this movement as to whether you should get out and do nonviolent resistance. Well, we had a poll yesterday among our audience, and we said, what do you think? Do you think that people should go into abortion clinics, or at least outside, sit on the grass, so-called nonviolent resistance? Do you appreciate this? Well, here is the result of that poll. The answer from 20,999 total calls, yes, an overwhelming 95% of our audience, only 5% was opposed to it. And that astounds me. I would have thought again it would have probably been 60-40 or something, but 95 to 5. So you're saying on the 700 Club that contrary to some of the officials in the Right to Life movement, that you think that it's time to step up the pressure a little bit, and that you're supporting of those people down there in Atlanta. We'll have a live report later on in this broadcast about it.